Hi, everyone. This is Alexander Lim, and welcome to AuthorStory, where on every episode we speak to a different author on a particular topic of interest. On today's episode, our guest is Gretchen Steidle, the founder of Global Grassroots, a nonprofit organization which intends to catalyze women and girls as leaders in their communities. Her book is titled Leading from Within, and you can check out her book out right now by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. So, Gretchen, welcome. It's great to have you with us in Author Story.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. So, Gretchen, first off, what made you decide to write Leading from Within?
Great question. So I have been working in both the fields of social entrepreneurship or working in the international nonprofit sector, as well as the mindfulness sector for about 15 years. And it's been very apparent to me from the earliest days of my work that investing in your own well-being and personal awareness are critically important to be able to do work to create positive change in the world.
All right.
Increasingly, we start to see, the division that is happening in politics, the pointing fingers and blaming people who get disillusioned and burned out, angry activists. And I felt it's so needed now for more people to recognize that as mindfulness is starting to become more well known out there in the world, that it is a tool not just for your own well-being and stress management, but it can influence the way that we build relationships and solve problems, and that it's critically important to anyone in a leadership position who wants to create positive change.
Right. Okay. Got that. So, about the book, was there like a single aha moment when you realized, I write this book, or it was just like a growing realization over time that, this had to come out?
More of a growing realization over time, and something that I had started working on bit by bit over a few years now.
Okay. So a few years. So how long was this book, I don't know, in the making then?
Well, I think it's probably 3 years I'd been working on different components of it for different purposes until I was approached by my publisher, MIT Press, who actually asked if I wanted to write about this book. And that was the catalytic moment where I said, yes, I've been trying, but let's make it now.
All right, cool. All right. So let's go over a little bit of what some of the topics the book covers and also with your experience. Now, there are a lot of nonprofits going around nowadays, which aim to help disadvantaged communities uplift themselves throughout the world, so to speak. And as you just mentioned earlier, a lot of people get burned out and particularly, I believe, frustrated when things don't work out. After they've done everything they should have done, things should work, but they don't. What exactly is going on here, in your opinion?
Well, I think that most of the world that is trying to advance change in some way, whether you're doing it as a nonprofit or an activist or someone within an existing institution, we tend to use methods that tell or try to influence or force people to comply with what we want. And we will use sticks and carrots to try to get them to make that kind of change. We look often at someone else outside of us as being responsible for that change, whether it's a perpetrator or a policymaker or someone else who's on the other side of our viewpoint. And there's a lot of finger pointing and pressure. And when they don't change, or when that change is temporary until power dynamics shift and someone else is in office and they overturn it, we get extremely frustrated. We get angry and we blame, and we don't spend as much time trying to actually understand each other at a deep human level as to what drives change, what what causes us to avoid change? What is our resistance? And really, what are all the dynamics happening at the sort of root level of an issue?
Mm.
And so my method and what this book is about how to use mindfulness to become an expert on change from the inside out.
Mm.
And I present sort of 5 different capacities that you can develop and use by practicing mindfulness that helps you actually use it as a design tool, as a tool for solving problems, building better relationships, getting to the bottom and diagnosing issues, and creating solutions that are going to be more sustainable because they work collaboratively, inclusively, and at the roots to get at what's really needed for real long-term transformation.
All right. Okay, cool. So we'll get into those 5 aspects a little bit later, but I would like to ask, for the benefit of our listeners, heck, even for myself, can you give an example of, what you mentioned, like the carrot and the stick approach? People try to make people do something that they're probably not, I don't know, fully, I don't know how you'd call it, enrolled in or something like that. Can you give a solid example of that?
Yeah, so one of the examples I use in the book about this is, let's say, policy around smoking. Let's
Okay.
say we increase a tax on packs of cigarettes
Mm-hmm.
in order to try to deter people from buying them or continuing to smoke them. And that may work in the short term with new smokers or people who aren't as heavily addicted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but remove the tax and they're more likely to buy those cigarettes again. And if they are severely addicted, those kinds of punitive measures or incentives to, kind of change behavior are not really going to change them because that's not helping the underlying reasons and challenges of addiction. So
Mm.
working in a different way than just applying sticks and carrots to people is getting at the roots of how does smoking begin? How do you treat addiction? What are the other challenges facing people? Trying to get at a deeper human level of these challenges, and you can apply this to virtually anything. It can be looking at immigration issues in this country, or race relations,
Mm.
or gun violence,
Mm.
or poverty. If we go through a process of really utilizing mindfulness to understand how people handle change, and we do it from our own personal experience
Mm.
first, we will have a very different way of working with them than simply using those sticks and carrots to get them to do what we want.
All right. Okay. So, mindfulness. You mentioned this several times. What is your definition of mindfulness? Just so we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah, the best definition that I've come across that I used was coined by John Kabat-Zinn decades ago, and
Hmm.
it is simply paying attention on purpose in this present moment.
Hmm.
So that means that you're being very aware in this moment of everything that's happening inside you and around you. So on the inside level, that could be, what does my body feel like right now? I'm feeling energized or exhausted, or I have a pain in my neck. It can involve noticing your emotional state or your mood, realizing you're getting irritated with somebody, or that you're, feeling awkward. It
Hmm.
can also involve noticing your mental activity, that you're noticing you're spending a lot of time worrying about something, or planning for something, or ruminating about what you wish you had said or wished you hadn't said to somebody in the
Okay.
past. And it can involve what's happening around you, like being very aware of your senses and what someone is saying and what is unfolding around you. And when you can kind of hold that awareness of your internal landscape and your external environment simultaneously,
Hmm.
that's being fully present. That's
Mm.
complete mindfulness. And the other important thing about mindfulness is that we usually practice it with a quality of curiosity and non-judgment.
Mhm.
So we're noticing it, but we're not like judging it or getting angry about it or, beating ourselves up because we're feeling a certain way. We're just kind of being with it.
Mm.
And you can practice mindfulness with there's dozens and dozens of different kinds of practice
Mm.
that help you develop the skills to be mindful.
Mhm.
And what is really fascinating is you can look at mindfulness as a form of brain training, because you're essentially like doing weightlifting. You're exercising your brain by practicing being mindful. And as you practice it over time, and science is showing us that you're actually changing the structure and functioning of your brain
Mm.
by doing this. And there's many different benefits to you as a person and physiologically and mentally from practicing mindfulness in these ways.
Okay, okay, interesting, interesting. And I suppose, I mean, mindfulness is this like a conscious effort, or does it just like this does it just like happen?
Well, it has to be a conscious effort, because
Okay.
that's the process of being mindful, is that you are conscious.
Right,
What
right.
you will find is, as you practice this, and mindfulness can be, you can practice this in a formal way, like setting aside time to meditate and to really be aware in that moment while you're
Mhm.
sitting there of whatever's happening. And you can bring your attention to something very specific, like just however you're breathing in this moment.
Mhm.
Or you can have more informal moments of mindfulness throughout your day, where you just use a cue, like every time you hear your phone ring or walk through a door, to take that as a moment to be aware of everything happening around you.
All right.
And the more that you do that, the more you will discover that you will have more moments of mindfulness more naturally. Um, but again, it still involves consciousness.
Okay, okay, all right, I got that. Okay, so let's get a little bit into the five aspects, elements that you mentioned. I mean, your foundation and your movement is essentially about conscious social change, and from what I understand, these five elements are the bedrock, the foundation of your movement.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, good, I got that right. Okay, so what are these five elements, and what are they all about?
Sure. So the first one is cultivating presence. And this is simply what we were just talking about, practicing to be more self aware
Mhm.
and aware of what's happening around you. And there's many reasons sort of why this is valuable for you, but most importantly, the more you become self-aware, the more you start noticing the way that you have normally kind of been on automatic pilot. And this is not easy. A 2010 Harvard researchers study revealed that our minds are wandering about 47% of our waking hours. That's why it takes
Okay,
practice.
okay.
So once you do start noticing yourself, you start noticing the kinds of things that we usually do on automatic pilot, like how we react to things that cause us stress, how we handle fear, how we judge people. And once you start noticing those things, you can actually begin to change them.
Hmm.
And as you change them, you start to recognize how change is actually kind of hard, and thus you begin to have a deeper level of compassion and understanding for all those other people we're always trying to change out there. So that is the first step. The second step is called becoming whole.
Hmm.
And this is where, as we practice that self awareness and we start to work on our own behavior, um, we begin to change the way we interact with the world. And we are, the quality of our attention will affect the quality of our relationships.
Mm.
The way that we understand change from the inside out will influence the way that we engage with other people.
Hmm.
The more that we approach ourselves with less judgment and more curiosity and are able to be vulnerable, the more we can extend the same acceptance to other people.
Mm.
And the more we're going to be able to work with others more as allies than opponents. And one of the things that this mindfulness process does is allow us to express ourselves more effectively, to handle anger, conflict with less anger. We'll have more positive emotions, and we'll be able to be more effective in our interpersonal skills. So that's becoming whole. Mm-hmm. The third piece is called ensuring balance, and that means that the more that we're able to be really present and aware, the more we're going to notice when we need our own level of restoration. So instead of burning out and getting disillusioned, we can take time to step back and restore ourselves so that we, don't get stuck in a place of exhaustion one day and not realizing it.
All right.
The fourth one is called engaging mindfully. And so this is where we use all the skills we just used for ourselves to understand change from the inside out and to be more aware. And we start doing that in the way that we engage with others. And so we are more capable in setting aside our ego and assumptions and bias to be able to actually inquire and listen to other people. We're less likely to think our way is the only viewpoint, so that we don't kind of try to ram our agenda down somebody else's throat, and instead we seek out greater levels of understanding across difference to identify common ground. And this all allows us to diagnose or understand issues more comprehensively that we want to work on. We're more likely to draw from a broader set of perspectives and invite greater participation because we acknowledge that everybody has wisdom from their unique experience, and we want to understand the whole system at the roots, just like we were understanding ourselves at the roots. Mm-hmm. And that allows us to develop a deeper understanding of an issue, an understanding of stakeholder needs, and to surface the best ideas so that collaboratively and inclusively we can solve problems together. That ensures that that solutions are more sustainable because everyone feels like they have a stake in it and that they've been consulted, as opposed to being pushed through without their participation. Mm-hmm. And it allows for greater innovation and creativity because of that collaborative effort and longer term transformation. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of bringing this mindfulness as a design tool into the way we engage with others. And the final part is called leading from within. Mm-hmm. It's the more that we are using mindfulness in the way that we engage with the world, we are more likely to be listening to ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're more likely to be driven by our own passions, not just for personal gain. Mm-hmm. We're more oriented around benefiting others, and we thus can inspire those around us to pursue a common cause with meaning and impact, and we become inspired leaders from that perspective.
Okay, interesting. So it occurs to me, that these 5 elements are, I don't know how to put it. It's like a total new paradigm of way of operating, of working together rather than just you do this or else kind of thing.
Precisely, I do see it as a alternative paradigm for creating change, and where so much of when we're in the sticks and carrots mode is about achieving something for our own interests, self-interests, or for a limited self-interest group. Mm-hmm. In this case, conscious social change is really inner driven for the common good. And so we're really looking at what's optimal for this entire ecosystem or community, and we result in much more creative and sustainable solutions. There's no exact formula for what that outcome is going to look like, and the process does take more work sometimes,
right?
Or at least it seems that way in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But the results will provide much deeper understanding and longer term transformation.
Okay, I got that. So these I mean, how would people enhance these elements, these aspects within themselves? Do you explain the book how it works, or how people can actually do this?
I do. So the book has the theory behind this and the principles, a lot of case studies, but it also has the practices.
Okay.
So gives you step by step what you can do to start practicing mindfulness, then how do you use it when you work with other people, and solving problems and working towards building stronger relationships. And
Right.
I also could not fit in the book. I created a toolkit for conscious social change, which is also available on my website, conscioussocialchange.org.
Mhm. Okay, okay, got that. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about results. I mean, you've global grassroots has existed for quite some time now, and I'm sure you've got, well, I'm sure, I mean, everyone has some failures, but I'm sure you've also had successes as well. Can you give a solid example of the work that you did in a certain area, so for our listeners to get to get a concrete idea of how this thing works?
Sure. I've got two examples. One's really quick, just to give you a sense of how the inner work can really transform your view on a situation, and then I'll
Right,
give you an example of how we work differently as an NGO using these kinds of tools and what the outcomes can be from that.
right.
Um, so first of all, one of the easy practices that I teach people is taking 3 breaths as a way of giving yourself a little pause
Hmm.
anytime you feel yourself getting sort of emotionally triggered, like you're starting to get angry or irritated. And by giving yourself that pause, it allows you to um, connect with a little bit more mindfulness to how you want to respond instead of just being in reactive mode.
Hmm.
So I asked my participants, how this is working in their regular life. And a woman said to me, yesterday I went home after class, and this is one of my women. I work predominantly in East Africa,
Hmm.
and with very vulnerable, uneducated women.
Hmm.
And she said, my kids totally messed up my house, and I was really angry
Right.
that I just cleaned it up. And usually I'd spank my children, but
Hmm.
today I remembered what you said, and I took 3 breaths, and I realized that I really don't want to hit my kids. I
Hmm.
just want them to clean up the house. And
Okay.
I was able to explain that to them, and they did. They listened to me, and I didn't have to beat my kids today.
Okay.
And that alone is profound. But what was amazing is that this woman was working on a venture
Hmm.
related to domestic violence. And for the
Mm.
first time, she realized in that moment how hard it is to change automatic behavior that creates violence.
Hmm.
And she developed a whole different level of compassion for the perpetrators as she was trying to address as to what would be necessary to help them stop their behavior.
Hmm.
And it shifted how they were working on domestic violence once she realized what she had to work on within her own life so that she could embody her values.
Hmm.
And rather than simply work around domestic violence between couples, they also incorporated a component on parenting,
Hmm.
especially how they were raising their boys. So
Right.
these simple moments can do so much. I always say if people were taking 3 breaths before they were tweeting, sometimes it would create a whole world of difference out there.
Right. Right.
So that's one quick example on how these practices can influence how you look at a social change issue.
Hmm.
Now, as a nonprofit working in the international space, I see so often how entities with very good intention come in to fix something, and they
Hmm.
sort of impose their expertise on a community, and then they later try to hand it over and hope that it will sustain itself.
Hmm.
We don't do it that way. We use this more mindful approach of engaging collaboratively as a partner
Hmm.
and supporting that self-sufficiency and the ideas of the broader community, and recognizing they understand these issues way better than we do.
Hmm.
So we often work on issues of clean water access in
Hmm.
communities. And we could go right in there and say, "Oh, you need a well, we'll just build it to you for you and hand it over." But here's what it looks like when you don't do it that way.
Hmm.
We would go into a village and we would sit down and we would ask the local community to tell us more and teach us about the issues they're facing and what
Hmm.
their ideas are to work on this.
Hmm.
And we had a group tell us that, yes, they need clean water. And one of the issues around this is that women have to walk sometimes 3 miles or more, which can take, hours,
Yeah.
down a steep slope to collect water from a dirty and contaminated spring or well, and then walk it back up the hill again, which
Hmm.
takes a very long time. It's heavy. 50 pounds is usually the weight of about a 5-gallon jug that they can carry.
Right.
Um, and, they're walking in remote areas where sometimes they're attacked and experience sexual assault, and it takes a long time, so it can be a trigger for domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And if they send their girls to help them, then their girls are late to school and sometimes fall behind and drop out because they aren't, in school all day.
Right.
And those who are disabled or elderly or pregnant or blind, they simply can't do it. And many of them in this village were being forced to trade sex with men to get it for them,
Mm-hmm.
which is a risk of transmitting sexual transmitted diseases like HIV.
Right.
So these women, and this was an issue we would never have known about. They said this sexual exploitation was what they wanted to work on most for the disabled.
Mm-hmm.
So we trained them in our skills, and we helped support and fund them to build a project of their own design.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided they wanted to put a gutter on a church right in the middle of the village to collect water in a tank and purify it, sell it to those who could afford to buy it, so that give it away for free to all the women that they knew had been sexually exploited. So they were going to protect all those women. And they started serving 100 households.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what happened next was amazing. So first, gender relations started to shift.
Mm-hmm.
These women in their late 70s were sleeping side by side next to their tanks at night to protect their water from being stolen. And soon the men saw how valuable the project was. They started asking to join the project, and when a woman would get sick, they'd offer to take her shift at night just to help her husbands to help out their wives.
Mm-hmm.
They started making enough money from selling it to those who wanted the water that they could afford then to buy women's health insurance, and then they paid for orphan school fees. And then they started a revolving loan fund that spun off a bunch of businesses for the local vulnerable women.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started teaching others that were walking from 3 hours away to learn from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they expanded to 3 new sites. And today, 10 years later, the venture is still operating sustainably, reaching 9,000 people with clean water.
Wow.
And it is run by a group of largely illiterate women. Only 7 out of 19 of them know how to read, and are now seen as leaders in their community. And none of that would have happened if we imposed ourselves and our own agenda and said, we know what needs to happen and we're going to make this, impose ourselves. Instead, this was a collaborative process that was mindful and patient and supportive of local initiative and their understanding.
Right, and that's definitely a new way to go. I mean, instead of just saying, okay, build a well, like build a well, that well might have been abandoned within half a year or something like that. But with this one, 9,000 lives changed in the course of 10 years. I mean, 9,000 might seem small compared to a population of billions, but that's something. That's 9,000 lives.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay,
And this process
go ahead.
can be used, really, this process can be used as a problem-solving process on anything, whether you're talking about school budgets or, your kids getting ready for school on time. There's
Right.
a more mindful way of solving problems collaboratively from a deep human understanding. And that's why this book, I hope, will bring these tools to individuals, groups, and organizations and communities to try this around their intractable social issues.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a lot of social issues going around nowadays. I mean, there's a lot. Okay, so Gretchen, let's say you came across someone, but someone who's come across, economic gulf amongst people, much as you have. This person's raring to do something about it, maybe start a nonprofit or an NGO of himself or herself, and you only had time to tell that person one thing. You only had enough time to tell that person one thing. What would be that one thing you would tell them?
Go and listen.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing you can do before you decide to establish your own work in the world is to listen deeply to those who are affected by the issue, that are on both sides of the issue, to bring people together, to invite their wisdom, perspectives, needs, and ideas. And from there, you can facilitate a process that will provide you with a much more optimal solution than if you just go in with your own ideas right off the bat.
All right, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so great words right there. So, Gretchen, in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any other words of wisdom you'd like to share, maybe to give our listeners something to think about?
If you can take each day a simple 7 minutes, the average time of a coffee break, or
Hmm.
set your snooze button, and instead of snoozing, get up, sit there, and just with your eyes closed, pay attention to your breath. Just watch your breathing. That is all you have to do to start the process of building the brain's structure and functioning of mindfulness that will allow you a whole different way of seeing and experiencing the world. And if you do anything, take those minutes daily for your own mindfulness practice, and you'll begin to see shifts in very short time.
All right, cool, fantastic. So great words right there. So in closing, then the book is Leading from Within. The authors are guest Gretchen Steidle. So Gretchen, thanks very much for being an author story. I must say it was very enlightening for me, and I hope too for our listeners, for the paradigm you presented, one that's a totally different paradigm.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Cool. So everyone, I invite everyone to check out Leading from Within, and of course, please feel free to subscribe to our channel. So I'll catch you all next time on Author Story Weekly Interviews with another amazing author.